welcome back to my tiny corner of the internet. And in today's video, I wanted to talk about why I'm no longer a populist, why I haven't been a populist or a pro-democracy person, for quite some time after that. There was a brief period when I started my channel, I was eager to rationally debate people and, change ideas when I realized, I was willing to sit down in discussions and exchange the facts with people and just, have these really intellectual discussions with people on what I think is the best way to change society for the betterment of everybody. I was rather idealistic in my notions of how people thought and reasoned with. I figured that if you brought the right facts to the right people, even if it was in their interest, they would eventually change their minds and all that sort of stuff, and they would inevitably wisen up and kind of see the other side of the fence. Or maybe even not fully agree with you, but, give you good reasons why they don't agree with you, right? Give you reasons why that sort of stuff, But what I instead came across was the nature of the clout economy, how people debate, how people think, how people act, how they invent post hoc rationalizations of what they're actually feeling, because they don't want the truth. They want truth that's relevant to them. And that was a bit blackpilling to me. It was a bit tough on me to understand, is because it was incredibly frustrating. It's like, I would say that, hey, maybe this is a better way to do it, and, I would try to win favor over them, and, they wouldn't even give me an ounce of the charity that they gave to other people who are far more disingenuous than I ever was, and it just drove me up the wall. It's, people had less charity for me than the people that they had in the favorites of their hearts. They didn't want to engage in an open discussion. The people I was trying to reason with, or even get these ideas pushed forward with, they would just completely get ignored. It's because obviously I didn't have enough popularity to even participate in the discussion in the first place, is because a lot of people use clout as a proxy for how true an idea is, especially today. But the fact is every time one of my videos gets on the algorithm, it gets, posted and a bunch of new people see it. Okay, there's no shortage of pedestrian midwits who come in every here and there, and then basically think that they've debunked your entire argument without even understanding your argument. They somehow know your entire argument, and they misparaphrase it, and then they say they debunked it. And then when you tell them that's not your argument, they tell you to present your entire thesis in a comment in a YouTube comment section. And you're just kind of like, you want me to tell you everything I believe within a 500 character limit on a YouTube comment section when you can just literally go watch my videos? And so, and then when you point that out, they'll say, well, you have like some odd amount of subscribers, and therefore, I don't have to look at your sorts of stuff. It's because, obviously it's, not true, is because, my clout argument, and therefore it's just not true. And, this kinds of stuff after a period of time was incredibly blackpilling about like the nature of internet discourse, is because, back then, and I kind of partially blame the COVID pandemic for bringing every normie dipshit on the internet, but, previously, you could have come to the internet to have good discussions and good faith discussions with different perspectives and try and reconcile them. Nowadays, you just can't even do that. And honestly, it was infuriating at first, but then I just kind of recognized that's just the nature of humanity. People are not rational people. They're not critical thinking. And it kind of sucks. It's like, you can't have a nuanced discussion with people who have outright interests, which they're inventing post hoc rationalizations to create. But then I came across a video on Twitter, and it was of a fat Indian man handing out taxpayer dollars back to taxpayers. And, he was getting celebrated. He's in this very nice vehicle in the countryside. He's obese. You can tell that he gets fed well. But the constituents which he's handing this money out to, they're not very fed well. They're pretty impoverished. And, a lot of the times people would mistake coming into a video like that, being like, oh, these people are oppressed. These people, need to be liberated, because the fact is they're being exploited by a system that literally takes their money and then gives it back to them and pretends that they gave them free money and all that sort of stuff. You could probably make a joke about socialism or something like that. I know some midwits probably going to come to the comment section, make that point, but that's neither here nor there. But the fact is that, like, when it comes to who people put in positions of power, who they choose to listen to, just like this fat Indian who's giving back money to the people that they took from the people in the first place. They never actually created anything. They're not making their infrastructure or society even a modicum better within this situation. They're celebrating it. They're happy. This fat retard is feeding the normies, and the normies are eating it up. They're like, oh my god, this guy's like literally the messiah, even though we literally don't even have like fucking toilets invented or something like that. And so I wanted to kind of give some insight on that sort of stuff, is because a lot of pro-democracy people don't recognize this fact about people. People more often than not deserve the rulers that they get. They deserve it. Yes, they're not oppressed. They chose that leader. They chose that person to control them, to have that political power over them. This is a matter of choice. This is not that they're oppressed. It's because what I've always hated about the populist narratives that people always talk about is that simultaneously the people are the most mighty thing ever and they're going to change all of history, but at the same time, you know, they're oppressed by this tiny minority of elites that are controlling them, and they just, you know, are just somehow too stupid to actually overthrow a minority of people. And that's when I realized it's like I got really irritated at that narrative that people create. And people would do it all the fucking time. Oh, the majority are going to rise up against, you know, this oppressive thing, and then they never do. Like, they literally just whine about it, and they get smacked around by the government a couple of times, and they get back in line, okay? No, the majority has never driven history forward. It never has. It has always been a tiny minority of people, whether it be the elite plutocrats that run our society behind closed doors today, or, you know, a technocratic elite, or what I advocate for, right? You know, it has always been some section of society that has led society to something. And it has never been anything but that. Even, you know, communist philosophies that are all about worshiping the people, and the people are the masters of their own destiny. Even Lenin had a vanguard party of professional revolutionaries that led society to their victory. It has never been the spontaneous majority ever uprising and, you know, leading anything. Okay? And I realized when I watched that video that no, it has never been there. You are not oppressed by some closeted elite. This is your fault. This is your responsibility. Because at the end of the day, there has never been an oppressed majority that has never risen up to power. If the people didn't like these people, they would have gotten rid of them a long time ago. This is why I don't believe in an absolute monarchy. Absolute monarchies don't exist. It's because the fact is, you know, you can even point to Game of Thrones. When no man who declares himself a king is a king. It always has to go with the fact that people either tolerated or recognized a tiny minority of people and allowed them and enabled them to do what they've been able to do. It has always been the people that have been responsible for their own situation. And it's no different with the fat Indian that's basically feeding these dipshit normies their own money. No. Like, those people are not oppressed. They chose that leader. They chose that oppression, if you want to call it that. They chose their ruler. The people, at the end of the day, are responsible for their own rulers. There is no such thing as an unelected tyrant that infinitely gets away with whatever he wants to without having his head chopped off. And when they do cross the people too much, you know, just like Tsar Nicholas, they get executed, because if they don't actually do what the people want, the people are going to get rid of them, okay? So the idea that there's always been an oppressed majority that's going to rise up and, you know, stop this elite tyrannical thing is just a mythology that it was invented by populist dipshits who just don't even make any logical sense. You know, the pro-democracy people who always talk about the democratic uprising of the people has only ever existed in a situation when people got fed up with a monarch or an aristocracy that was just that got so sick and tired of the elite that was governing them that they had no choice but to revolt against them. But people will tolerate a ton of shit before they actually do anything. And it's no different than the idiots that are basically just taking their own money back from a fat Indian who is just basically making himself look good, like he's the people's savior, you know, by taking their own money and then redistributing about them, right? At any point in time, any single one of them could say, you know what? This fat retard is just taking our money and giving it back to them. Why is he getting credit for something that we created ourselves, that we earned ourselves? He just taxed us and he just gave us back our own money. But not a single one of those people are doing that. And I bet you, even if you were to do that, and some of the people were to go, you know, hey, you know, this money that he's giving us is just our money in the first place, you know, there's no doubt a sensible portion of that population that would shout that person down, saying, like, how dare you, you know, talk down to the person who's giving us free money. That happens every time, okay? The people very much get the rulers they deserve. And I want that to kind of sink in. And again, at the end of the day, it's no different than when I talk about the climate change stuff. Okay, I could go to any number of leftist bases, propose technological solutions right there and right now. It would go right over their head. And they would probably have an inferiority complex to change civilization for the better. And they wouldn't actually agree with me. They wouldn't be like, okay, we need to actually do this. You know, they would consistently find a reason to bitch and nitpick about what I had said rather than address a single argument that I had ever said. People who are so concerned about society ending because of climate change, all of a sudden you're going to nitpick every solution. You've nitpicked nuclear for the last 50 years. And, you know, where has that gotten you? Has the climate gotten better now that you've gotten rid of nuclear fission power? Is CO2 emissions going down? No. No. It's all about partisan politics that you want to do. That's why I can't stand pro-democracy idiots. I don't like democracy is because it's retarded. If people were less retarded and they were actually rational, capable beings who were able to sit down and have a good discussion, and there are definitely people in the circle, in my circle, that do that, right? You know, then I'll probably be more pro-democracy. But just the way people act, no, democracy, people don't know what's best for them. You know, you're going to tell me that when it comes to electing leaders and people to lead a society, you know, people who are rational, animalistic creatures are going to make that best decision on their own? You can call me elitist for that, and I personally don't care, right? You know, you can get mad at me on that sort of stuff. I'm a nobody. But the thing is that if you notice a common pattern and problem among people, you just can't help but point it out every once in a while and not just tell people what they want to hear. I mean, I could tell you what I want to hear. Like, oh, the people are going to uprise against the tyrannical elite that's just gonna, you know, take power and make things, you know, just and fair and all that sorts of stuff. And then, you know, 50 years down the line, they're going to complain about another elite that's taken power, that they that is all of a sudden taking advantage of them. The people can always revolt, but you know, just something just seems not to change. Maybe a little bit more self-awareness to the situation, you know, might actually help. Maybe a little more critical thinking might actually help in choosing what might be best for yourself. Because at the end of the day, right, you know, you're always going to have some kind of elite governing you, someone ruling you. And so maybe being a little more self-aware of that might actually help your civilization, your society, to a better and brighter future. That's all I want to bring to this table. I'm not more or less trying to say, I'm not here to argue politics. They're politiques, should I say. I probably should do it, because the fact is, you're going to think I'm talking about politics in general, but like a politique, you know, a republic, a monarchy, right? I'm not here to argue formal systems. I'm here to talk about human nature and how people act, behave, and think. Because this is how people act, behave, and think. Okay, it doesn't matter if it's a formal monarchy or a formal republic. It doesn't matter if it's a direct democracy. This is just the way people think. I'm not trying to make an advocacy for a monarchy here, right? I don't believe in a bloodline monarchy. I personally don't care about that. But the thing is, this is how people act and think. And you have to understand how this works to be able to engage with it to some degree, right? And on top of that, it also takes some understanding from people, just ordinary pedestrian midwits, to say, okay, you know, I'm going to dig deep into the stuff to try and understand it, rather than just completely hand-wave it, while I can basically spend all day watching Vosh, okay? That's one thing that's irritated me as a content creator, is that I go through, you know, great lengths to talk about economic planning, linear programming, you know, input-output matrices. I talk about these things, and then I get a hand-wavy, like, pedestrian midwit that, you know, thinks my opinion is equal with somebody like Vosh. No, I'm sorry, my opinion is not equal to yours. I'm trying to do something a little bit more than that. But, you know, you can take it or leave it. I'm not looking for your validation. I personally don't believe there's really much hope for people. People are free to do whatever they want. They're going to do whatever they want. And just like the fucking fat Indian and the retards basically following him, rather than just kind of stepping back and looking at the situation, I don't expect people to change. No different than I expect those dumb shit normies in the Indian video to change when you walk up to them and basically say, hey, you know what? Maybe this isn't the best situation for you and your society. Would you consider something different? Because a lot of the times, I'll say it again, people very much get the rulers they deserve. They get the leaders they deserve. There is no such thing as an oppressed majority. If you are oppressed by some, you know, elite that you're complaining about and you're trying to make populist propaganda about, you should look at yourself and wonder how you got in that position in the first place. Is because this elite, they can't do anything unless you allow them to do it. Because at the end of the day, if you're right, and there's no such thing as an absolute monarchy, and if it's not popular, right, then at any point in time you could say, yeah, we're not going to tolerate this. This has always been something that the people are always ultimately responsible for. So yeah, I'm going to close off this video because I think I've made my point. My point has always been this. There's no such thing as an oppressed majority. People very much deserve the oppression that they have, because the fact is, at any point in time, the people can always just say, you know what, we're not going to tolerate this anymore. And I'm tired of making excuses for people who always incessantly talk about how they're going to do something and then they never do. All right, thanks. Peace.